My name is Anna Bartosik. In this tutorial, you will be guided through the action-oriented scenario template. I will walk you through the design of an appropriate light task for your particular set of learners. The scenario template is divided into two main sections. Section 1 is the template itself and will be the focus of this tutorial. Section 2 presents a set of instructions designed to help you navigate Section 1. I will elaborate on these instructions in this tutorial. In Section 1, there are 4 parts. This tutorial will help you complete each of the parts listed, but they don't need to be completed in this order. Be prepared to move back and forth across the different parts of the template as you design your task. To help you develop a scenario, you will need to consult a number of documents that we have compiled in the LinkDire package provided to teachers. Please take a few moments to locate the following documents before you continue. I will be referring to these documents throughout the tutorial. In order to complete the scenario template, we recommend that you follow these 6 guidelines. First, begin by using a backwards design. Second, select the relevant descriptors for your task. 3, develop the steps and lesson plans. 4, check for balance. 5, create assessment tools. And finally, review the scenario for completion and coherence. We will be looking at all 6 of these steps in depth, starting with step 1. When designing your scenario, the best way to proceed is to use a backwards design. This means that we think about the objectives first, and then embed those objectives into a real-life activity. Think of a real-life situation your learners might encounter where these objectives would be relevant. To begin, you will need to think about your particular set of learners. Ask yourself some of the following questions. What is the target CEFR level? For example, A2, B1? What is the context? Are the learners in elementary school or middle school? Continue thinking about an appropriate scenario. What type of task would help the learners achieve these objectives? What do you expect students to be able to do by the end of this scenario? What are some other languages in the students' plurilingual repertoires that can help them achieve the scenario? How can you embed this in your scenario planning? Once you have thought about the previous questions, you can now use that information to begin filling out Part 1, the scenario description. We suggest that you fill out the sections 1 to 6 at this time. You will have a chance to refine the section later as you finalize the scenario. Here is a completed sample of sections 1 to 5 of Part 1. The short scenario should be written in language directed at the learners so that both students and other light users can easily understand the scenario. Later on in the template, you will be describing the scenario in greater detail, planning each stage of your lessons. For other examples of level and context-appropriate scenarios, you may wish to browse the action-oriented scenario catalog provided. Now that you have drafted your scenario, you will need to select relevant descriptors for sections 7 to 12 in Part 1, the task description. Having a series of descriptors will help you make explicit the main actions that learners will be able to perform by the end of the scenario and how they will perform those actions. Let's start with section 7. communicative language activities expressed through can-do statements. These refer to what the students can do in terms of speaking, writing, listening, interacting, or a combination of these. Using the CFR, the extended set, and the CFR descriptors catalog to help you select the relevant descriptors for your CFR level. The guide is particularly useful because it is divided into the same sections of the template, and so may be easier to navigate than the extended text, the companion volume. As you browse through the descriptors, you might think that many or most of them can be applied to your task. However, we suggest that you limit your selection to only a few main can-do statements to make your task more feasible. You may want to adapt the descriptors to meet the specific needs of your scenario, such as specifying the type of text or type of situation. Here an example of an original can-do statement and one that is modified to fit a particular task. Take a few moments to look at the modifications in this example. Now that you have your list of communicative activities, let's move to Section 8, Communicative Competencies. Here, you will need to identify the different competencies that come into play. This means concentrating on the how rather than just on the what. It is important to keep in mind that the same activity can be done with a different quality of language according to the proficiency level of the learners and still be effective. Ask yourself, which competencies do they need to perform the action? Which competencies can they develop by performing the action? As you know, in language learning, there is much more than grammatical precision. One needs to be able to function appropriately in different situations, for example, by using the right register or being able to address a person, start or finish a conversation, and respect both linguistic and cultural conventions of a given context. To help you select relevant descriptors, consult the CFR Descriptors Catalog or Companion Volume and the separate list of descriptors to help you. Again, these may need to be adapted to fit your specific task. Next is Section 9, the plurilingual and pluricultural dimension. As we saw in the tutorial on plurilingualism, students don't start from scratch when learning a new language. This previous experience can help them in their learning process. Integrating a plurilingual dimension will also help them develop sensitivity to other languages and cultures. In order to complete this section, think about where and how students' plurilingual repertoires can be involved. For example, they could be made aware of similarities and differences in vocabulary and cultural perspectives on the task topic. Use the CFR Descriptors Catalog to select a few relevant descriptors. Learning is a process of mediating and also reflecting. These are reflected in sections 10 and 11. To complete this section, you will need to consult the CFR Descriptors Catalog and the Ability to Learn overview. For selecting relevant mediation descriptors, ask yourself the following question. How will students help themselves and others understand and produce the texts linked to the task? For completing section 11, ask yourself, how do students reflect on their learning process and build on their strengths? There are no proper descriptors for ability to learn in the CFR, but our document on ability to learn language learning strategies can help you. Once you have finalized part 1, you will have a complete understanding of your goals and the different dimensions you will have to bear in mind. Now, you can begin to design the various lessons or steps that will help your learners prepare for the culminating scenario. In your planning, don't forget the various dimensions of the medicine wheel that you have identified as relevant. To help you plan your lessons, think about how the task can be realistically broken down into steps. Each step should help learners build the competencies they will need to move towards the culminating scenario. Here is where your Part 1 overview comes in handy. Think about how the different steps can be designed to focus on the descriptors you've chosen. Part 2, scenario development, helps you with this. Include your notes on what happens, who does what, and which resources you and the learners will need. Remember that these instructions are meant for you, and so the language here doesn't need to be graded for the learners, as in Part 1. Now that you have planned your lessons, you now know how much time and what resources you will need, and you are aware of the potential stumbling blocks. So now with these elements, you should be able to complete the remaining sections of Part 1, Scenario Description. Let's move on to Step 4. Because you have many elements to consider, we've designed a scenario planner to help you visualize how your work will develop towards the culminating scenario. This will help you see all of the elements together and identify any imbalances that you may want to correct. The next step is to create your assessment tools. In the template, there are two parts to the assessment. Part 3, the observation checklist to be used by the teacher, and Part 4, the self-assessment checklist to be used by the students. This is a very easy step because you already have all your descriptors listed in Part 1 of the template. Here's a sample excerpt from a completed observation checklist for Part 3, the teacher's use. The empty checklists are organized around the descriptors you have chosen in Parts 1. And here is an example of Part 4, the self-assessment checklist for the students' use. You can see that the students' checklist will look slightly different from Part 3, the observation checklist. For both the category names and the descriptors, language should be written in a way that students can understand. For example, instead of the category name Communicative Activities, the students' checklist reads, What I can do in the language that I'm learning. The descriptors will also need to be expressed in an I can form and reworded so that students understand them with level and age-appropriate language. You may find that not all the same descriptors will inform your observation checklist and the self-assessment checklist. For grading purposes, please see the separate document titled Assessment Rubric. This rubric is designed for final assessment, but can also be adapted to assess progress throughout. This rubric can also be modified to the activities you are working on and according to the grading system of your institution. Now that you have finished creating your assessment tools, return to each section of the scenario template and ensure that all the sections are complete and that all parts are coherent with one another. Of course, things don't always go according to plan. That's why we recommend updating your template as you and your students work through the scenario. Record any changes and modifications can help you with your future planning. It can also help other educators plan their own adaptation of the scenario in their contexts and to be better prepared for some stumbling blocks they might encounter. This is the end of the tutorial on the action-oriented scenario template. On behalf of the entire LinkDyer team, thank you for your hard work.